Hello and welcome to another discussion in our literary fiction side hustle that we have going on the Page Chewing Forum. This is the fourth discussion like this one. We've read 3 Cormac McCarthy books and we are taking a break from those and talking about George Orwell's 1984 today. We discuss approximately one book every month. We have a little bit of a wheel spin that we do before each discussion to decide what we're reading next. And so far, Steve has won all of the spins. So what we are going to read next month is American Psycho. We haven't set up a time for it yet. So if you'd like to join the discussion, consider checking out the Page Chewing Forum. If you'd like to add books to the wheel and discuss those with us, check out the Page Chewing Forum. With me, I have some interesting guests. We have an unfantasy non-thinker and a double-think king. And Steve is just Steve, unless, are you not even Steve Schwarther today, Steve?
I'm un-Steve today.
Steve is un-Steve. So, Jared, the unfantasy non-thinker, could you start with introductions?
Sure. I am Jared, and I do run something called the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel, where I usually do not talk about normal literary fiction books, but fantasies or sci-fi. But today, I will be talking about a literary fiction book, and you can also find me on plenty of other podcasts on pagechewing.com and Speculative Speculations.
And the
Chris?
Double Thinking.
Double Thinking, that's me next. So, my name's Chris Moen. I have 2 YouTube channels, but if you concentrate closely, you'll find out that they're the same channel. 2 plus 2 equals 5, right? The 2 things can happen concurrently. One is just my name, Chris Moen, where I talk about movies generally, and then the Chronicle of Chris, where I keep my books and stuff. Discussions on there. Yeah, and you'll find me in Speculative Speculations and patreon.com as well. Steve, on Steve.
Yeah, I'm un-Steve. You can find me on Page Chewing or all the other podcasts that we have, Speculative Speculations, and all the other stuff we have going on. I'm really enjoying this literary side hustle. It's been a nice break from all the fantasy and sci-fi. Not that I dislike it, it's just nice to get a change. And I do like that we're reading classics and McCarthy, and it's been a fun ride for sure. It's been a great run.
Great thing for Steve, because he's won every book that he wanted to read. You know, the rest of us are just living in his world. You know,
we should just get rid of the wheel, and I'll just pick every book.
Yeah, exactly. It's worked out well. Like I've enjoyed every single book so far. So this is you're good at this.
We should mention for the listeners that this month I did pick your book that was on the list, Chris. So I did take we had a new list, and I did pick American Psycho, which has been on the list, I think, since the beginning.
True. It has.
And you had given up on reading it. So I did put it on, knowing it would get picked. So I am, it's not all. I'm not. There's no nefarious things going on. It's something.
You're a benevolent overlord. I see.
Yeah.
So basically, what I'm saying is, if you win my favor, I will put your book on the list.
I win this month. Oh God,
Yeah.
I'm part top of the being watched crew. Yeah, that's me.
For 7 years.
Yeah. So, question before we start. Having read this, as we all now have done, do you think this is the most influential book of all time?
Ooh.
Wow.
Oh, you came out swinging.
Yeah. That's a good question. Wow. Haymaker.
I would say, yeah, it might be. I think because this book is not only in literary circles, but I'm convinced every politician reads this book for. It's like a handbook on how to control.
Yeah,
and I think in that sense, it transcends just literary works that other books that are really influential, like Lord of the Rings or other books that we talk about all the time, because it's in the genre we discuss often. This book is at another level of influence, and Yeah, I think it could be. I think yeah.
Well, it's on a lot of high school reading lists, so it gets a lot of exposure. And I actually had to read it in high school in 1984.
Wow.
So that was, interesting. I didn't remember anything now. That's a long time ago. But, and of course, when you're a kid in high school, you don't take in what what you would when you're an old man. But yeah, I called it a perfect construction of sociological manipulation. That was a term I used. It really was. That's a great question, Chris. It really is. It's the book is foremost in my mind right now, so it's hard to think of something else that would replace it in that context as far as influential book of all time. But fiction wise or non-mythological wise, I guess. I mean, you could always ramp out the Bible and Shakespeare and what have you.
For sure. Yeah.
But as far as a more modern book that has influence other than religion, it's up there. It's pretty big.
Barsha, what do you think?
I don't know that I have an answer to that question per se, but I think things like the fact that there are phrases that we use in our everyday language, like "Big Brother is watching." I think that speaks to definitely the influence of the book, I think. And as to whether it influences politicians or if it's sort of a extraction of how politicians generally operate, I think I'm not super clear on that. I think there's a nice chicken and egg problem there, but I agree that it likely has significant influence. As to whether it's the most influential, I do not know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely influenced storytelling going forward. I mean, there's a lot, Steve, I think you mentioned something the other day about is this grimdark? And it was a funny question, but it definitely influenced grimdark, if it's not considered such, because a lot of the grimdark stories have an authoritarian, governmental function in place or religious function in place or what have you that tries to control the populace. That's Warhammer 40,000 certainly, and it's in a lot of other grimdark stories, and it's in not just grimdark though, but it's in a lot of other stories. The totalitarian regime is a huge factor in a lot of fiction. And this book definitely has its footprint on those stories that came after it, I would say.
Yeah, I always like asking that grimdark question because it was halfway joking. I mean, of course, it's it's just a way to get people, a way to start conversation. But it did strike me that because all the things people complain about grimdark, rightfully so, some of the complaints, but it's very dark. There's no humor in it, almost no humor. It's very oppressive. You never feel comfortable. You never feel like our main character has a chance. And when you do feel like they have a chance, it comes crumbling down pretty fast. There's torture, there's murder, there's control. I mean, it's all those things. So it is definitely influenced a lot of those stories because there is no hope, very little hope. And when you do get a sliver of hope, it disappears back to zero or negative even. So yeah, it is very, it's an uncomfortable read, and it is dark. It is very dark.
Yeah.
Bleak.
No, I was very uncomfortable reading this book. There was like literally all hope was taken away.
Yeah, it's bleak in the sense that you can't even, as a reader, imagine where the avenues of hope would come from. You know, they seem to have bled it and taken it away from people, and in doing so, have destroyed the society that we know, even whatever hope there is today. And I think I sort of thought about this yesterday, and we were kind of doing, well, we're going to be talking about this yesterday, but I think it's incredibly meta that this is a world that exists without the arts, right? And yet this is a book that's written in our time as an arts book, there's part of the arts, and to be this influential about how to do it, it's kind of the crux of why the arts is so important for exploring thought and exploring outcomes and exploring things that go through time and life and systems and political change that there is going, and it also does bear out the fact, and this is definitely one of those things for you if you've been alive for a certain amount of time, like when you were saying when you were in school, Jared, people didn't give their politics a moment's notice when you were that young. You could never see the relevance of it.
Not back then, no.
And now you can kind of see the steps from where we are today to this book. Like, you can literally see, you know, this led to that, leads to this. Even if you look at the people within our society and how it works, it's all there, even without social media, etc., being a thing in this book yet. But it was just another vehicle, a bit like the one that we have here now.
I think that's a great point about the importance of art, because I think in the last appendix about the principles of Newspeak, the part where they talk about how eventually the goal of the party is to make it so that the higher centers of the brain are removed from like the process of speaking altogether, so that we engage in duck speak, just the words come out, which I think is basically like, while that seems ridiculous, I think the summary of that appendix could essentially be that all the things that give meaning to literature, right, that make things worth, like, you're trying to figure out how to interpret it, maybe the poet saying this or that or the other thing, that's taken out and everything is mechanical and robotic to the point where you don't even need to think about it while you're speaking. And so that's essentially like the deletion of art from society, right? And that's how you get to that point. And with that, you also find that you're taking away meaning from life as well, which, yeah, so I think that's a great point. But that also made me think about Embassy Town with the removal of like similes and metaphors, which is what, again, I think adds the double or triple layering of meaning to language. So, yeah, you like to speak about how books bleed into each other, Chris. This made me think about Embassy Town quite a lot, especially just the appendix.
Yeah, I think it was chapter 9 that really breaks it down and really gives the like I think Jared, you said yesterday, it's like a handbook on how to control. And you there. I'm not trying to make parallels and say that we're living in this kind of world. Of course, this world is another level of control, but there are tactics that are used in the same way, and I think a lot of people think of social media as this free place, but it's really not. It's the government. Governments control what we say and what we don't say. They influence algorithms. It's another form of control. Yeah. So whatever side you're on, it's a way to control. It's a way to control the culture. It's a way to control what we think. It's a way to enrage us. It's a way to make us upset, to distract us. And in the book, it's discussed that there's always a war. There's always war going on. There's always something going on to rally behind the government. And I think now it's more about us fighting amongst ourselves, about arguing about things and being distracted with entertainment and these other petty arguments we have with each other, that they don't have to start wars because wars are expensive. They don't have to create the real wars anymore. I mean, not that there's not wars in the world, but there's a different type of conflict that distracts us, and we're distracted amongst ourselves instead of against other governments. So it's really, it's the way that that's been twisted and used in a different way to keep us busy. And we're more concerned with each other than we are with what's really happening.
Yeah. Yeah, you could take that point and you can push it and dissect it and like just bring up a whole bunch of different examples. And like one of the things I was thinking about was that it's not just governments that have this kind of control. It's also corporations that have this kind of control. You know, I don't know if Orwell foresaw that part of it, but it's the same idea. You know, and these corporations, the Googles and the Microsofts and so on, have all this power to direct us to certain avenues of thinking over the internet, and it's done in such a way that's subtle that even the most savvy person can still fall prey to at different times. And that's scary in and of itself, because it's a level of manipulation you don't know is being done to you. And it was very interesting to think about that as we've moved forward in time from the time that Orwell wrote this, because I know he was of course concerned with the specter of Stalin's Russia,
Yes.
and of course Hitler before him, and he was probably also concerned about how the military of even the West was built up in a manner to keep the war machine going. It was what drove the economy. It was what made the economy in the United States booming after World War II, and what helped rebuild Europe eventually. So there was some concern about that, because to keep all that going, you had to have the buildup of war apparatus, the weapons, the guns, the planes, and so on and so forth. And you could see that apparatus going all the way through 1980s, and it's what a lot of people were using this book as a comparison during the 1980s, when I was forced to read it in high school. And yeah, and now that the apparatus of control may have changed rapidly due to the technological advances of the internet and computers and online stuff like that, and thus other players have come in to do a different form of control. I think social control, which is what this guy was writing about, was social control today. And that's a lot of doom and gloom, and I would like to think that because we're all artists of one sort of another, we like making podcasts. That's an art form, right?
Some would argue.
Yeah.
That's our one grasp of freedom, right? Our one holding on to it, But yeah, but that's the premise. That you can go down that road and keep finding things, that examples of that kind of what Orwell has been talking about in this book, which can be very scary, and which is why I hate this book so much. So there you go.
So it's effective, I guess, right? If it gets that kind of reaction out of you, then it's very effective. And
yes,
you start to wonder: are corporations controlling the governments now?
I wonder about that all the time. Yeah.
I mean, I don't wonder about it, because they do. I mean, you can use any amount of examples if you want. There's long-standing ones, like, for instance, the gun controls and laws in America are pretty much the gold star example of how you can buy influence and how you can buy votes, etc., to control a government. The response to any amount of wars that can be on one side or the other, you can go around different countries in the world, and due to where there is influence of money or no influence of money, the attitudes to those wars can be like the two opposite sides of those wars, for instance. And in the advent of social media, etc., they've had, and the media, they've had the Levinson inquiries in the UK, which you're probably not as familiar with, but that's when the newspapers were tapping up people's phones to generate stories, and the net effect of that was nothing. Nothing happened about that, even though it was like a breach of all privacy laws that they were going. There was really no fallout other than, oh, we'll promise not to do it again, and of course they did. And I think if there's one major message rather than the government's thing, I think it's be careful of the message. Whoever controls the message controls the world. And in Orwell's case, I think he was talking about, the media, just in general, about the luster of the media and how much they were controlling it, because this manipulation of what facts were, and that people could not remember what, even if they lived through it, whether that was really the case or not. You can see that happening now with a lot of people. Like, my mum sends me stuff that she's seen on Facebook, and you just go, Mum, this is nonsense. What are you? I know it was on the internet. It doesn't mean it was true, But and Mum's quite an intelligent woman. Like, you can say that about me. There's things that I've been caught out with. You become this kind of vacuum. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from the book that I have is, while the message is there, they needed the individuals to do it, and everybody played their part. Everybody in society did their bit to perpetuate society for what it was. The people that were taking pride in inventing these stories are going back and changing the literature to suit the story that was coming for their head, to make up stories, and accepting that people were just taken out. Like, everybody was part of the problem, which I think is what made it so bleak in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you needed the Parsons, and you needed the children, and you needed, I guess, even Smith to play his part to perpetuate the control. And I think the mechanisms that perpetuate all of the messages, I guess, like the internet with all the rewriting of statements, you don't know what's real anymore. You need all these news outlets to tell you whether or not their news, like you need websites to tell you whether the news is trustworthy or not, and so on and so forth. I think between that and ChatGPT, I feel like Orwell predicted a few things here. In like, there's this machine that spits out fiction, apparently, that is then disseminated, something that writes rubbish poetry that the woman was singing while hanging out laundry. And I guess people are producing stories and quote-unquote literature with ChatGPT today. And that's also making it easier to disseminate propaganda, I know, from in some countries. So, yeah. There's a lot of, like, disconnected pieces that work. It's not that, things are as bad as what he's written about, but you can see fragments, and they're all mechanisms of control. Like, whatever the ideology is and whatever the need for power is, these are mechanisms to obtain said power, I guess. And again, like, I don't know if this book is laying out a playbook. Like, I don't think he was the first one to come up with these ideas. I think it's more of a condensation of these are all the mechanisms used across history. Because I was reading the Cicero trilogy, and that one was depressing in its own way, because politics apparently hasn't changed in thousands of years. So in that, they use, again, war, the fear of war, to gain control for a dictator. And similarly, here, the notion of war is used to get votes, to keep Big Brother in control, and so on and so forth. So I think it's sort of like a nice little summary of all the mechanisms used across time.
When we fear death or another country or another government, when we fear that there's this danger, then we cling on to our own governments to protect us, to keep us safe, so that we give control, the Patriot Act, we give control for them to protect us, and they slowly take things away. So, but yeah, it's very fascinating. And redefining what words mean. We've seen that in the last few years. I mean, words are redefined all the time. Words aren't what they used to mean, and it's so.
Yeah, you can look at it cynically and go, God, I think we'd recognise the signs in modern society, but I'm not so sure that we would. Like, you can take the idea of being a perpetual war and say, God, that would never happen. Look at Western society since 1949, or since the Second World War. It's been a constant state of readiness for war, whether it was a Cold War that lasted pretty much to the mid to late 80s. Then you had the Iraq War straight after that. Then you had the Middle Eastern wars. Now we've got Israel, Palestine, and Ukraine, Russia war. The world is in a perpetual state of war in order to funnel money in. And one of the key points that obviously Orwell makes is the fact that every stockpiles weapons, with everybody already knowing that the use of any of those weapons ever will signal the end of civilization. So nobody can ever use these weapons, but that's the threat of the weapons that is actually important in society in terms of protection, or everybody has to have their guns loaded, so to speak, just in case. It's a fallacy and and almost just this waste of money. It's like the people that bought all the toilet rolls when COVID happened. You can't rerun out of toilet rolls because that's the only food's not as important as toilet rolls. You don't want to be wiping your bum with paper.
What a strange time.
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah, I think. Okay, yeah. I have a lot of questions about. There were some things that were left a little bit vague in the book, and I'm wondering. I don't want to shift gears if we're still discussing certain things.
I think this is going to be the nature of the discussion of this book, because it is sort of everything and nothing in one particular thing.
There's one thing I was curious about with when Winston and Julia were together. It was about the middle of the book. It seems like Winston has a realization that the rats were a way for them to. They were using rats to spy on the people because the rats were. Was that implied, or because I took it as there was a line in there about the rats were always, and Winston I think kind of stops the conversation with Julia at the time because I think he realized that the rats were listening, or that the rats were being used as a way for them to monitor because the rats were always around. Was that just me, or was that something that the rest of you noticed?
So I thought that was metaphorical.
I didn't realize it. Yeah,
I thought it was metaphorical
because
rats were used to spread the plague. I mean, that's rats' most famous thing. So to perpetuate a fear in society, rats were used. So it's like almost a subliminal link in his head that the rats could be used as a pawn to spread the message or whatever. But I think it also was to serve as a way for you, the reader, to look at the world and the environment around him and go, actually, what is happening here? Like the woman singing that was to distract him down in the alley, that seemed to be singing like the nonsensical song, etc., was almost certainly part of the control act. The fact that people didn't sing, people didn't emote in that way, and yet here there was somebody doing that, and it was enough to have him fascinated and lose track of time and all of that kind of stuff. So for me, I'm not sure I mean, I could be picking it up wrong, of course, but for me, I think it was more allegorical and has that dual purpose of being a metaphor for the plague and also for being aware of your environment.
And it has that sense. Of course, a rat is somebody who tells on somebody else, right? So
that's right.
It's symbolical in that manner as well. And there was also the act of Julia, right? Covering up the hole in the wall to block the rats, trying to block out Big Brother from seeing them in another symbolic way. And of course, it turns out they were watching them the whole time, but it was but that was that. Yeah, that's how I took it. I took it as that symbology, that all that was going on, and that's a very interesting point about the rats were also the symbol of spreading things, and of course they spread information like a plague, the information they want to spread like a plague. And so that's it's pretty good. I don't think there's any part of this book that's not constructed with all that meaning into it. This book really is put together so well. It's such a masterpiece. I think you can read any part of it and get that kind of allegory out of it, that kind of symbology, and that kind of deep meaning out of that. This book there's no accidents in this book at all, and it's so well put together. That's why I hate it so much.
I was going to say, you need to finish every sentence that you say here, but I hate it.
Exactly. I'll drink to that.
Yeah, the relationship between Winston and Julia it's very impactful. I think it's exactly what the story needs, actually, at that time, when it kind of talks about systems and messages and the way the politics goes, to kind of bring it to a human connection, and for his fear to dissipate at that moment when he just gets the piece of paper that basically tells that somebody's attracted to him. Because, I mean, at the core of it, that's the most basest instinct in society, that happens, and these people have never had it. He's been married and he's never experienced it, so you can kind of see the almost childlike nature with the way he approaches life. Then it's like, they start off being careful, but actually it doesn't take long before devil may care. It actually doesn't matter if we get caught. It's better to exist in this state than it is to exist without it, and that bit's so effective, and I think it's so interesting that somebody decided then to write the book from Julia's point of view, because I think that is an incredibly interesting point of view. Can't wait to read that book by Sandra Newman.
The relationship was interesting. Like, I had many questions about it. Like, the way he changes his perspective on her. What you said, right? Like, it's not something that he's ever used to feeling. Just in the real world, he might, not immediately respond to the first person who comes along and says, I love you, and instead he might go looking. But he went from utter hatred to like wanting to commit some vile, despicable acts on her to, oh, I love you back, like just seeing those words. And it's a very theoretical affection that he has for her, I think, and in his own monologues about it afterwards, when he's been arrested, when he thinks back to how he feels about Julia, it's more like he's got this disconnect between how he feels and how he thinks he should feel. So I thought that was very telling of like the rest of the times. Like, he's got this one little freedom that he thinks he can take, and he's taking it, and you're right, like stops being careful almost immediately. Because she could be just like the guy whose apartment they were renting turned out to be. She could have been the thought police, and he wouldn't have been any the wiser for it because he caved so quickly. But that, I thought the writing of that was very interesting overall, because it felt almost like an intellectual exercise for him to feel affection for her, not an actual emotional response to her, if that makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah, that relationship was interesting. I mean, it definitely served the purpose of the story to give it. That was like the one part of the book where you're like, oh, maybe there's a little hope, right? Maybe you think you kind of know they're gonna get caught eventually, but you're like, maybe there's gonna be some at least mental justification on their part, in their minds, for doing what they did and getting together the way they did, and going against the state. And but this it made, for me, it made the reading a little easier going, because I was like, the first part one of the book, I was just like, oh, this is killing me. And then and then part two, at least there was that was like, okay, all right, we can keep going. And then, and then once they get beyond that, once they are caught and they're brought into the prison or whatever it was there, then you have the downfall and the down spiral of all hope and the shattering of it, and you're blatantly shown the methods of how they shattered his hope, and they shattered his mind and completely turned his thoughts into basically a big brother disciple. And that hope that you got from part two, that I got anyways, that totally crushed me when it was crushed in Winston. And I didn't even like Winston that much.
Yeah.
But it crushed me. And that's what he did so well in this book. It's just...
But it was a metaphor for society, wasn't it? It wasn't. You didn't have to like Julia or Winston for it. It was like they were representative of a way of life that seemed to be dead and was crushed and oppressed.
Yeah,
in a lot of ways, right. It was almost a metaphor for the entire book. And I think you can't help but ask the question that if you were living in that society, would it be better to live and do that for 6 months before you get caught and killed than to exist for a lifetime in the robot automaton state? And I can come down quite strongly on the fact that it was better to have lived for 6 months properly and had some sort of free choice, even if it was only fleeting and very controlled in a way, because they were obviously mixing up where they met, etc., than just going through a day-to-day drudgery of just drinking gin all day, not having any sugar, not knowing which, all of those things. They didn't know bread, all of that stuff. Like, they'd stripped everything away from society to the point that they were literally just ants at that stage. Another book bleeding in to another one that we've read, like there's Children of Time coming in. They take away the individuality of being a human.
Yeah. We are the dead.
Yeah, we are the dead. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
I think that's the one variable that this government knew they couldn't control is the people. Life will find the Jurassic Park famous quote: "Life will find a way."
Mm-hmm.
I think it's part of the human condition that we seek out companionship and love and those kind of things. So how do you control that? How do you eliminate that? I think it's probably the one thing they couldn't control as much is for people to just reject those feelings for someone who passes you a note. But I think the scene that when they get caught was absolutely terrifying. It was so well. That is one of the most tense and frightening scenes I think I've ever read.
Yeah.
Was it also not just a little hilarious though?
Who's the grimdark person here? Yeah,
this is not the person I thought was going to say this.
No, but I think what made it funny to me was Winston would say something, then Julia would repeat it, and then the voice behind the painting would repeat it. We are the dead. We are the dead. You are the dead. Yeah. They have us surrounded. They have us surrounded. We have you surrounded. So like the confirmation from the voice while chilling, it was also slightly hilarious. It might have also been the audiobook narrator, but I found it funny. Like I hated that I did, but it was funny.
The voice, I think we listened to the same audiobook.
Simon Prebble?
I think so. But he used a different voice for the like a really cackling voice for the so it did have an impact for sure. I don't know if it was funny, but
but yeah, the Ministry of Love, which maintained law and order, that was the department for that. And And again, another allegory to the fact that as soon as he found a relationship or something outside of his mundane life and life, that's when everything became open to him then. Like his willingness to rebel and to fight against society to preserve that was very much the heart of who he was at that stage. Like nothing else really mattered. And it's why controlling love and relationships and all of that kind of stuff is so important to that way of life, if you know what I mean, and to that society, because you could, in one part of the hope is, well, maybe they could just let Julia and Winston live together and they'd be sort of happy at the side, but they never would be happy because society is not predicated on that. And in other ways, they just need somebody to change the facts. They need somebody to go back and rewrite the stories. They need somebody to write whatever fiction there is that is controlled and allowed at that stage, much like, you know, communist Russia, etc. Communist China does as well, and to a certain extent our AI bots will do in the future for us. It is interesting how that freedom to choose or freedom to love is linked to freedom of choice in life. Yeah, very meaningful.
For me, the logical extreme to which this was taken, where nobody's allowed to think, nobody's allowed to like live a life, really, to the point where I think even the inner party members don't really, because Winston and O'Brien have become inner party members, but they are, you know, party stands. Is that the term the kids use? And what was I saying? So it is extreme. It feels like it's something that cannot happen, but it's not quite that. It's more the levels of control, I think, that is the commentary here. Not that this can happen. Like, that's just ridiculous. I don't think any single power wants to go to that logical extreme where even like they don't get to live life properly. But it's more about like sort of, you know, scaling it up, making it big to see, okay, these are the things that could lead to a really bad situation. It's not necessarily going to be this bad, but it could be bad enough that you have your freedoms taken away.
I can extrapolate that going forward, because again, I come at this a lot thinking, especially in reading first time, go, God, that could never happen. But if you have a society, right, that outlaws love or seeking out of relationships from an early age, and a world where arranged marriages happen, if arranged marriages happened in that vacuum, then it would seem much more normal and much more like a better way to live, so to speak, than having free choice. So I could definitely see it happening. I just don't know how you control hormones. Yeah. Like hormonal control, I think, is almost impossible. That's where a lot of crime actually comes from in our society, even as it is, especially around sexual assault and all that kind of stuff. Is the fact that repression of people's base being it happens, and that's really the bit that wasn't explored in this book at all. There was no crime that happened, and like, okay, I get that you mightn't see it, but this place would be rampant with crime. This kind of society would be complete rampant, regardless of consequences or otherwise. People's need for survival would take over, and most instances of crime, etc., are based on poverty anyway. So, if you keep a group of people, and the 85% is the old sort about the proletarians, in abject poverty, there's going to be a lot of crime in there in some ways, and I think that's the one bit that I look at and go, oh, that wasn't really in there.
Well, it might have been subtly, because he mentions, because Winston goes to the underground, so to speak, and he goes to like to the black market, what have you, and he sees how some people, the proles, basically, are living, and they're kind of allowed to do what they do. They don't have the same strictures that he has, where he has to get up, go to work, never say anything bad about the party, never think anything bad about the party. It was the proles didn't seem to have those same strictures that he has, but the proles, according to the handbook, that Winston was reading did not have the ability to rise up as one to, because when like in the handbook, when the proles got that ability, they became the middle class, and then they became controllable by those in charge. And then when the middle class became the ones in charge, they in turn were the ones that were controlling. And there was that cycle of history that the lovely handbook that he was reading was explaining. And thus the proles seemed to have a bit more freedom in what they could do, even though they were suffering the whole time they were doing it. But there was the illusion that they, at least, were not under the mental control of the state, even though they obviously were under the physical control of the state, because they relied upon whatever handouts they were going to get. So I think there was a hint of that in there. But the book was so focused on Winston that it's easy to, I think, miss that other stuff that, because we only seen it through Winston's eyes, so you only get that little glimpse, But I just had that feeling that that's how it was, based upon, and it was based partly upon Winston's reading of the it wasn't even, it's not the party's manual, it's the supposed Brotherhood's manual that he's reading, and that was explained in there.
Have you read it? I wrote it. Love that line.
Yeah, that was great. Right, which I think pushes that point even further.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Question about that. Did he write it as a means to sort of draw out potential thought criminals, or was he formerly a thought criminal himself when he wrote it, and now he's using it to lure people in? Like, what was, like, I don't think it was specified, but what do you think is the most likely explanation?
Well, it doesn't matter, because now it's used to draw out the thought criminals, and that's how it's always been. Doesn't matter what the original was.
No, exactly right. As he points out, there was nothing in it that people didn't already know. It was it was just sort of like this echo chamber for people to go, yes, see, I knew it. It's that thing that happens when people look at conspiracy theories on the internet and go, I bloody knew they never got to the moon. See, the rocks aren't real, or whatever it is, and the people become absolute.
About the original confirmation bias.
Exactly, that's exactly confirmation bias is exactly the word I was looking for. You're absolutely right there, Jared. Regardless of what it was originally thought out to do, it was exactly it. And again, there are many books that use this idea that the controllers write the mythical book. We'll come to a couple in the sci-fi masterworks that I can think of two off the top of my head that do this, but to say what books they are, ruin the book, so to speak. But this happens quite a lot, I think, which is again another one of those archetypes and tropes that maybe didn't even start here, but definitely is very effectively done in here, because it's not only, this is where it's really effective, it's not only a manual for how that world exists, it's a world for how our world exists. This idea of class that's discussed in chapter 1 of it. I remember being in school in the mid-80s, right, maybe in 1984 again, not discussing this book, but being told by our teacher at that stage that class had nearly disappeared from society. And he was a working class to middle class person, and that's what he believed. And yet, we're 40 years later, class is probably more important than ever in society. Those kind of divisions didn't really disappear, but the way that it's described in that chapter 1 is actually true. The middle class become that they get liberal people in every so often in government, and then people get rid of them because the all has to go back to change. It is so accurate in so many ways about how the 20th century played out, and that's its real power as a manual for control and for how to get people to do what you want.
the labels change, but the separation doesn't. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Basically, the lower classes are always screwed.
Yeah.
You
Very
convince them
much
that they're needed to accomplish a goal. You use them to accomplish said goal, and then you throw them back, and you exert your control over them again, and they go back to having no control and just being pawns for whatever control there is. It's wild. This book is wild.
And the one thing that they have in modern society as a get out clause for anybody is education will be your savior. Like as it turns out, in our case, it actually, the way society is now, it might take 2 generations before that actually changes for you. But education and getting your kids then educated is the way kind of to progress out of society. But this book makes the point that they took that opportunity away from the proletarians. They kind of made them think that education wasn't that important. There was no point even doing it. They're limiting their vocabulary. They're taking away the arts. They're taking away their expression, needs for expression, and just getting them to kind of live in slums essentially. And to Jared's point, kind of do what it is that they want or need within their own society, but without affecting any of the bigger stuff around it.
Yep, I think it did. The book laid out the bits about education, right? That we're not going to educate them, we're not going to give them any information, keep them ignorant so that they don't rise up. And I think that works to a great extent. And that is the playbook of the organizations over the centuries, right? To leave the masses uneducated, or take away information, or ban books, whatever it is.
Or change information, yeah.
Yeah, change information, yeah.
Yeah, on that point, Vasha, I have a book here called Hijacking History, and it explains how the Christian right is teaching history and why it matters, because they're basically they're following the playbook of 1984 exactly, with places like Bob Jones University, who teaches specifically that the Civil War was only about state rights, and they teach specifically that they downplayed Jim Crow laws, that they didn't really happen the way they taught they happened, and it teaches specifically that it was one other thing that they pointed out, but it's a great book that points out all those things, and it's invasive in the homeschool sector. These books that they print, and that's where they're starting, and they're forcing some of these altered history books into they get them into all the religious-based schools, but they're trying to get them into public schools as well. And it's pretty scary when you read that, because it really sounds a lot like 1984.
There's always been
Seems
any
like
number.
yeah.
Sorry,
I'm
Steve.
sorry. Go ahead, Chris. Sorry. No, go ahead.
There's been a couple of moves over the past 20, 30 years to change what books people read in schools. Like there's been a case. I'm sure it's happened in Britain, and I think it's happened in America a couple of times, about people's desire to read certain types of fiction, or the fact that we should be reading certain types of fiction as part of an education.
Oh, the book bannings have gotten out of control in the United States. It's really bad.
I think it's there's just so many different angles and so many different people vying for control in what's being taught and what the control over culture now is more important than education. But I did have a question about Winston, and I'm curious. They go through all this trouble of re-educating him, torturing him. He goes through this whole gamut. He is pro-party by the time he's, of course, he submits. He lasts longer than I thought he would, or than I think most people would. He goes to room 101. He seems like he's drank the Kool-Aid. He's part of the team. Why kill him? Because they could keep him employed. He could be someone that they can use for their own goals. He's submitted. So is it just a matter of these people disappear and never come back, and that's what everyone on the outside sees, that Winston disappears and he never comes back? Or is that more valuable than to eliminate him than to have him reintroduced and have him spread the word of the party?
That's a great question.
Is Winston dead at the end of the book? He is? Oh.
I didn't
Is
necessarily get that. It's the I Love Big
Oh, really?
Brother at the end, isn't it? I don't get that he's necessarily dead. He could be dead, actually. It's definitely a possibility.
Because he does feel the bullet in his brain, right, at the end? When he's walking in there behind him.
Behind him, that's right.
There's someone behind him. They always do it from behind. And
Yeah,
he feels the bullet.
Oh, yeah.
The
he
long,
went the
hopeful
long
bullet was entering his brain.
Brain, that's right. Yeah, no, okay. To try and answer the question, I think they have a lot of examples of people previously. The three guys that they originally did it with, the three guys that they brought back into society, tried to integrate, but who continually were working in the background. They probably thought they had them figured out, and I'd say that even for Winston, as fearfully as it is, take him out of room 101 for enough time and give him, another relationship. He's going to be back to where he was beforehand, and it's too much of a risk within society. This is a society where they don't respect life, they don't need life, they just need people to plug people in. So why take the risk of keeping them alive if the only thing that's really important is to keep the system going?
If he's too much of a risk, then why not just kill him right away?
This
Why
feels like
educate him?
I think this was a daydream that he was hoping that the bullet was entering his brain, because Winston, sitting in a blissful dream, paid no attention as his glass was filled up. He was not running with cheering any longer, and that paragraph goes on to end with the bullet entering his brain. So I kind of assumed it was part of the daydream, but I could be wrong. Maybe it's left to interpretation either way. But
Could be.
if it is not a daydream, it's kind of sad. The ending is sadder than I thought, because he has this whole thing about how he lock away what he knows into this like tiny pocket, like a cyst, and then it will erupt just at the moment of his death before they can do anything about it. So if in fact he is dying at the end, the dying thought is that he loves Big Brother, not he hates Big Brother like he wanted it to be. So
Yeah. Well, I think O'Brien kind of explained it earlier on, where he said, "We want you to love us before we kill you."
He basically says,
That's what
"But we'll
that's
kill
what
you."
he
He's
said.
very flippant about it, yeah.
Yeah, and so maybe the idea of letting him live was them just making sure that when they finally do kill him, he's going to love Big Brother. And it was more about the power of being able to do that, just like the whole book when O'Brien was constantly saying, it is about power. That's all it is. We stay in power for the sake of having power, and power is God. That's it. God is power, power is God. And so it was all about O'Brien. I don't know what level of party he is, but maybe he was trying to prove to his boss that he could make this guy love the party, love Big Brother, and then, all right, I did what I was supposed to do. See ya. I proved I could make somebody love Big Brother in after everything that Winston's been through. Because that's what he told him. He basically told him that before he started torturing and all that stuff, all that grim stuff.
So after copious amounts of research, it looks like he is not killed at the end.
Oh,
Yeah,
So
he
what's
does
the
not
danger?
die at the end. The novel ends with Winston sitting at the Chestnut Tree Cafe drinking gin and playing chess and contemplating Big
Of course he's
Brother's
drinking
face. Of course. However, Winston has been tortured and brainwashed into conformity, and his fate is left unresolved. So,
Yeah.
Victory,
all
Jen, no less.
yeah. So I misread that one.
Freedom is slavery.
I mean,
Yeah.
it was ambiguous, I think.
Slavery is freedom.
Slave.
But I actually think, regardless of your reading whether he's alive or dead, I think the end is actually the same in a lot of ways, because he is sort of dead intellectually. You know, he is just part of the system at that stage. He's, as an individual, has given himself over to Big Brother at that stage.
Yep.
Shit, it's bleak.
It really is. Can I start a new topic?
Absolutely.
Sorry, did we have anything more to say about this? No? Okay, new topic. So that conversation where Julia and Winston give themselves up to O'Brien, and he asks them what they would be willing to do to express their hatred and like to work against the party, and they say yes to everything except betraying each other, which was interesting for two reasons. One, like I said before, I don't even think they care about each other very much, except on a intellectual level, that like they have the freedom to love each other. I don't think I'm convinced that they actually have much affection for each other. But the second thing was they're sort of becoming the thing they hate to overcome their hatred, like to fight against it, or they're willing, or they think they're willing to do that, which again is interesting. Like it's both chilling and like, if you become the thing you hate, are you not part of the problem in order to fight what you hate?
And to tack onto that, there is that bit where he's in room 101, he's getting tortured, and he says, Winston says to O'Brien, I didn't give her up, even though he did in a lot of ways, but O'Brien sort of accepts it. You know, it's that idea of, what do they mean by giving each other up? Like it's that idea of freedom, isn't it? It's not actually the person, it's the idea of, I'm not giving up the idea of love, or of wanting love or seeking love. That's the bit that I'm doing, regardless of the person.
Yeah. So they got changed, like they got conditioned in all these ways to say, and Julia says they can't change what you believe, which, sure, but let's say hypothetically they were actually working against the party with O'Brien. Let's say that movement meant something and they actually did all these things. Would they not have then become just like those people? And at the end of it, the only belief system they have is that I hate the party. Like, you don't have any morals that you're fighting for. You don't have any like real freedoms, because you're willing to take away others' freedoms by disseminating venereal diseases, apparently, like, and whatever other things that they said they would agree to. So it's not even like a core ideology they're fighting against. And I think Julia is an interesting parallel to that as well, because what she hates is not the same as what Winston hates. Winston is chilled by the fact that the past can become undone, that there's no concrete reality outside of himself. But Julia just doesn't like being controlled, which similar but different, I think.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, Vasha, because they thought they were going to the Brotherhood to change, to give themselves to the cause of overthrowing Big Brother, they were pretty much promising to do all the same stuff, all the same bad things that the party does to people anyways. And I remember reading that and I was like, what are they doing? That, like, are you willing to throw acid in a kid's face, And I'm just like, and I was just like, wow. I was like, step back, wait a minute, what are you promising? Because you're promising to do the same stuff that the party is doing to the populace as it is, and of course that was all part of O'Brien's plan. But it was very telling about their character. And like you said, it was only hatred for the party that was their cause, rather than actually having a cause that would be a policy that was different than the party, to that was a philosophy that was different than the party. It wasn't. It was the same philosophy, and so bleak.
But how do you fight an oppressive regime like this without going to those? Without doing those things. I mean, how do you fight back? How do you get the attention and the? What do you do? I mean, how do you fight back? How do you fight a government that is willing to do anything?
So the people that they're agreeing to hurt are not the ones who are hurting them, right? At the very least, I would hope that a core ideology for anyone like that would be to not hurt innocent bystanders.
Right.
Which I think... Sorry, go ahead, Jared.
Yeah. No, and I think we have that, now in our movements. Like, for instance, the civil rights movement was a movement that definitely had a different ideology than the status quo, and it worked, and it wasn't perfect. There were a lot of gray areas, but the Civil Rights Acts got done, and there was that's reality. This is, of course, 1984 is your extreme example and your extreme cases. So yeah, you're right, Vasha. In reality, you're going to have the compassion that is needed for a change to take place, and that's probably the difference, is that Winston and Julia didn't really have that compassion, and maybe it's because they weren't brought up to have that they weren't, they've been conditioned, whether they know it or not, even though they think they're going over to the other side. They've been conditioned to think the way they do, even though they think they're rebelling.
Yeah. So it boils down to, are you fighting to be the one in power, or are you fighting to protect what you love, right? Or protect what you think needs protection? Or so are you replacing a totalitarian regime with another one, because that always happens? Or are you fighting to do the right thing, which how do you do that? Steve has a point. Like, it is difficult to I guess not hurt people, but also that can't be the default. Like, that can't be something that you're willing to do right away.
I don't even think it's as complicated as that. I think most people, even to today's society, all they want is to have a purpose. It's nothing to do with actually, being in power or anything. Like, most people just want to have a purpose, and for some people, they find that purpose as they go through their life. That can be through parenting or otherwise, or getting into a career in a position where they feel they're making a difference to other people. And I think for Winston and Julia, they had a purpose and a job. Their roles and titles within the society were well defined. They knew what they were doing on it on a day-to-day basis. They got comfortable in that stage, like a lot of people do, and then started to look around them. They were starting to look outside that. So you can think, if you've been in any job for any length of time, people get bored at that stage and either want to progress or have room to progress or move to another job. I don't think our society's any different in that way, and I think that's sort of what happened to Winston and Julia here. They had sort of an elevated place within the society, even though it was a very controlled government system, but at a certain point they could go in and do their job, turn it off and not do it. So they started to look at the people they were having lunch with. They started to look at how other people were behaving, and that sort of led to this point. And I think that idea of progress and opportunity is a core tacit of any kind of function in society. So you would think that if that happened in modern day society, that the removal of those opportunities would lead to some sort of affirmative action in people. Maybe. Possibly.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And actually, just to add to that,
affirmative action.
well, I was just going to say I said that because obviously we live in a society that is democracies, right? We all live in democracies, but in all of those democracies, about half the people don't vote. So people's idea of affirmative action isn't always to vote; it can be to do something else that sits outside that.
Yeah, they don't, but they do have the right.
They have the right to vote to do
but
so. I think if that affirmative action would not probably take the form of a vote is what I'm basically going, because a lot of people are disengaged with that kind of stuff. But who knows? We are not quite at that stage yet. I don't think.
Yeah. No, we're not. We're actually not, and we're actually, if you look at actual data, society's actually doing quite well.
Oh, data? What do you mean, like the numbers? Or our foodstuffs have went up 3% last month.
the fantasy data that presented.
The price of chocolate went down.
Price of chocolate went down, even though it went up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where is the data from?
Well, yeah, that's what you got to worry about, where the data is from. But if you can look at reliable data, however you get that reliable data,
Reliable data.
and if you look at actual crime statistics on a greater scale basis, compared to like 100 years ago, it's way down. And stuff like that, diseases and stuff like that. Even with COVID, it's still way down. And that's medical advances and all that stuff, all the technological advances and stuff like that. It doesn't mean things aren't bad, because things are bad, but they could be much worse. And so all we can do is try to progress and make things better as a society. And when we do podcasts like this, I think we're doing our job, right?
Sure. That's it. But
what was
biscuits
doing our job? What was everyone's thoughts on Winston and Julia reuniting at the end? That must have been of really awkward conversation, because they both obviously, they were both alive. They both gave each other up, right? So at some point they both gave in. They both drank the Kool-Aid. They both knew it. I don't think there's any judgment there, because they both did it, and I think anyone would, or most people would, after a while. So that was a very touching and just, I don't want to say horrific, but it was a really sad reunion.
Sad. Yeah, it's very sad.
Again, it was almost,
because they're almost different people.
Yeah, I was going to say, it kind of pervades this idea of nihilism through it, that kind of sits within the book anyway. Is like, what is the point of it all? What was the point of the fight if at the end, not only did it make no difference, but they accept that it made no difference? You know what I mean? It's like, right. Well, that's one of the reasons that Jared, I think, hates the book, is because that pervading idea of nihilism kind of does rest at the end of it,
sad.
You know?
Yeah, that's it's hard to put into thought, other than just saying, yes, it's depressing as hell, but it's so well done. In that, to make you feel that when you're by the time you're done with the book, it's so well done to make you feel that depression and that hopelessness and scare the crap out of you. Like, don't let this happen. It's the big warning. Don't let it happen. And I think he probably needed that kind of an ending in order to really drive that point home.
Yeah,
don't
you
let it
couldn't
happen.
have a happy ending that everything worked out at the end, because then the effectiveness of the book is lost in a lot of ways. It kind of says, oh, but it's okay, everything will work out in the end. It's more of a cautionary tale than that.
Yeah, I don't think it would be as powerful if at the end, him and Julia managed to live together or managed to get together somehow, and maybe Big Brother still won, but they managed to be together. So it's like, okay, I don't know. It wouldn't have the same impact. I don't think it's definitely it's such a cautionary work. It's such a warning that the warning wouldn't be as effective if there was any kind of spark of hope for the main characters at the end there. This book sucks. I hate it.
It is a hard book to review. I haven't actually watched your review yet, but I don't know how I feel about it either. I mean, it's a brilliant book. It is an extraordinary book. And back to that conversation that I've seen happen on YouTube. How do you rate this book based on enjoyment? Because can I say that I enjoyed this book? Shit, no. I mean, this is not an enjoyable read in any way, shape or form. Fascinating? Yes. Thought-provoking? Sure. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Gets you interested in things and makes you look at society in a different way? Yes. So, how do you judge this book, other than to say it's brilliant but I hate it, which I think is actually a great review.
That's what it was. Yeah. It's a masterpiece. It really is. Hate it.
Yeah.
Would you recommend somebody read it?
Yes.
It's mandatory. I think everyone should read it.
At
That's why they make you
16
read
or
it in
wait?
high school.
Yeah.
No,
That's
I think
the
it's you have to
question.
wait.
Yeah,
I think it's you don't. Yeah, I mean,
it meant absolutely nothing to me in high school. Like absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Gone, in and out, done. It meant nothing.
I read it when I was early 20s, I think, in my early 20s. So I didn't get it
2
then
years ago,
either.
Josh, I hear you.
Oh, come on.
Not like the cynical old bastards there is.
Yeah, I didn't get it then. As in, it read to me a lot like what's the other dystopian I read around the time?
Hunger Games.
The Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, Handmaid's Tale,
Oh,
yes.
The Handmaid's Tale, whatever. And that, again, like, yes, it is pointing to problems in the society, but that logical extreme probably never going to happen, right? So this felt a bit like that, but now it was more chilling because a lot more things felt like they're happening right now.
Yeah.
And it's not like there's one central organization that is doing all the things that are being described in the book. It's distributed. Like you guys pointed out, there's organizations, there's governments, and there's parts of the internet, I suppose. But across all of them, the control on people is getting to completion, I think. Close enough, perhaps. But on the subject of, I think, what we were talking about a bit earlier, about doing something or affirmative action, as you put it, Chris, I really liked the beginning of the book. Like, I think it was in the first chapter when he first started writing the journal, and he wrote, "To the future or to the past, to a time when thought is free, when men are different from one another and do not live alone, to a time when truth exists and what is done cannot be undone." I really liked this section, so I'll give you some context around why I liked it. There is one reporter in India whom I really admire, and for those who don't know, the Indian media is basically under the government's control right now. Like, they spend 24/7 praising the Prime Minister and the government, except for some reporters who had to leave their networks and they now do reporting on YouTube. So this reporter won the Max Essay Award, and as part of his acceptance speech, he said, not all battles are meant to be won. Some are fought just to let the world know that someone was on the battlefield. And this reminded me of that, like someone was there noticing that things are wrong. So I really appreciated that beginning of the book.
Yeah, good point. That's cool.
And to that point, I think that is kind of the point, is that actually you don't fight these kind of battles with people, with arms, with bombs, anything like that. Anything of this magnitude gets fought with ideas and ideologies, and if there is any bit of hope in the book, and I think it sort of lays this out towards the end as a possibility without ever going there. In this 3-state world that they have, Eurasia, East Asia and Oceania, if only one of them breaks, they all break. You know, it is contingent on the 3 of them being in this state of neutrality, or, you know, nothing happening. They're sort of locked up with each other. But if only one of them would break, then the whole thing would break. And I think if there's one piece of hope in the book, that would be it.
Yeah.
Well, so we're told.
So we're told. Cynic.
That's my job.
Yeah. Oh boy, what a book.
And can I start a newish topic again?
Always.
Another scene that particularly stood out to me, the 2 minutes hate, when Winston starts with thinking about how ridiculous it all is, but then joins in with a vengeance, and he participates in the hatred, and how primal that is, and the primal nature that is being tapped into to do all of that. And like, we get a lot of explanation later on about why that is, but I think just in the opening sequence with that was visceral and like extremely, like, that was a phenomenal scene. That was brilliant.
Yeah, and I like how in many aspects of that, hate was the more powerful emotion for people going forward in this book, and until he falls in love with Julia, and then that becomes the more powerful emotion driving him forward. And it's like the party has to break him of that love, because the party uses hate as their that's what they thrive on. Hate equals power. It grants them power, and it's what they need to make him do again.
I mean, if ever there was a manual for 2024 Western democracies, hate is the vehicle to control society. You know, an awful lot of the things that are happening now are based on this idea of fear and hate and distrust, rather than positive emotions at all. And in its own way, the fact that Orwell realised that emoting would definitely be part of any system of control, creating avenues for emotion, etc., that would be very intrinsically in there, is both interesting, but modern society has sort of even replaced this, not just with the emoting part of it, but this distraction. Social media every 6 months throws up something that just envelops society. So what colour's the dress? How much did that take over people's lives? Are there more doors than wheels in society? There are any number of these things that came up that totally became the water cooler moments, replaced all films, TV, whatever, music that ever was going. People just kind of fascinated. And politics, sadly, has evolved to the point that you just need to wait enough for a news cycle to go round till somebody gets distracted by another one of those things, and you can bury any ill that you can and need. And people have understood that news cycles are just transient. Like, the people don't resign anymore over things. It's just there's no need. Wait a week, it'll be gone.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true. It's and like you can try to bring up bad things that certain politicians did back in 2016, and nobody knows what it is. Nobody remembers. They barely remember bad stuff that people did in 2020. It's all washed under the bridge. It's all gone, and it what's new today. That's all that people look at, and what happened yesterday is forgotten.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I think in one of the last interrogation or like torture scenes, O'Brien tells Winston that he tells him, you're underestimating the capacity of hate. Like, I think he says something to the effect that you think that hate is more exhausting than love, but it's not, that you're underestimating the capacity to hate, or something to that effect, if I remember correctly. But and I was kind of disagreeing with that, but yes, perhaps hating one thing is exhausting, but if you keep changing what you present to people to hate, I think then you can keep probably milking that for a long time. Hopefully not forever, but
Yeah. It's kind of funny. Yeah. Now that I think about it, it's like the internet is doing what the party in Orwell's book was doing.
yeah.
For sure.
The internet is erasing the narrative of what happened and replacing it every day with a new narrative.
Yeah.
And it's not so much erasing it as just moving over here and distracting you from what happened before. It's forgetting it, and that's its own forgetting is its own form of erasure, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There was a fantastic line in there again towards the end about how he remembered something wrong. He had a memory of a wrong memory, which actually was a right memory. But yeah, even just memory as history, and that in and of itself is so fallible and can change so easily. And for that to be the last bastion of like hope to hold on to what is real history, I think that I think was another very interesting exploration in the novel.
It's frightening.
And lastly, for the topics I had, Winston and his mother, what did you guys think of that whole backstory with
Another happy story.
Yeah, that story was also deeply hurtful. Like, I have memories of like tantrums I threw as a kid, and I feel so embarrassed about it. And for this, like for Winston to have these memories, I think that just sucks for him.
Yeah, it's that memory of you did something or something annoyed you so much that you ran away from home for half an hour, right? And you hid somewhere until you cooled down or other one, and then you came back. But in this case, everybody was away and had left and abandoned. And I think it's actually most effective with the ending, where he reimagines his life with his mother. That's being there, because I think even more so than the scene with Julia, I think that's the one that really sticks, because again, this is a life based out of trauma. You know, he's lived his entire life with this trauma of being abandoned, so actually having an attachment to the party or the message makes an awful lot more sense, because he didn't have anybody else. He's never had anybody else, even his wife Margaret, who never made the attachment to. It makes everything else relevant for him, you know.
Yeah, I like that. Cool. Good book. Disturbing. Good book.
I have one more point. The one bit of humour I think in the entire book is Palmer and his two kids.
Oh yeah,
The fact that when he goes over to visit and the kids are spanning or training to be spies, and that the dad's so proud of them for being these upstanding citizens, and even to the point that they rat him out at the end, and he's like, "Oh, great kids."
And we
Shucks.
and the ambiguity there, whether the kid gave him up because he tried to discipline her the previous night, or if he was really talking in his sleep. Like, what? How convenient that he was saying Big Brother is down with Big Brother or whatever, and the kid just happened to be hanging out by the keyhole. Or how creepy if she does that every day.
If she does it every day. But even him going, "Thank God they saved me. I mean, I'm going to be killed and die,
Right.
but thank God my kids are that good. They're so talented. I love them."
Yep. That really was, yeah.
Oh man.
Bleak. Because you could say that about anybody, and they drag them away, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that breeds distrust amongst the citizens. So you're constantly afraid.
Yep.
Another form of control. Because your neighbor says, "I heard him say in his sleep," and they'll come and drag you away. Room 101.
This is a fear that Steve has.
Yeah, could be.
Oh man, that rat scene was terrifying. I hated it. I share Winston's fear of rats. I did not like that. I did not like reading that at all.
Yeah. That was pretty gruesome scene. Yeah. It was just imagining what would happen, because he described it to him before before they're going to do it, and just the description of what the rats were going to do to him.
And when he met Julia, she had a scar on her face, and again, it's unclear whether it's from the torture or if it's on the rats that he asked them to set loose on her. And on that note,
Yeah. I was going to ask one more question of everybody before we go.
yes.
We have read 4 books on our literary side hustle. Where does this rank?
Number 1.
Number 1 for Steve. The bleaker the better.
Easy.
Bleaker than
Whereas-
the road. That should be a cover quote.
Yeah.
For as good as the other books have been, not that they're, but I think this is just another. It just, there's so many different levels that it hits on. I think, Jared, you mentioned earlier that it's so well put together. There's nothing wasted.
Yeah.
It's genius. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
Well, everyone else,
Vasha?
The Road. Still first.
Well,
This is second. I think I barely liked Blood Meridian. So Blood Meridian, I think, Chris, you called this book Jared's Blood Meridian. So I appreciated that book, but hated reading it. So yeah, Blood Meridian and Child of God, same. Appreciated, but did not enjoy reading them. So The Road, this is a very close second. And then Blood Meridian and Child of God, I guess. Blood Meridian more than Child of God. So, a little bit of a tangent. I was listening to an interview of James Franco, who, for some reason, adapted Child of God. And he apparently had a conversation with McCarthy and asked him why he wrote it. And apparently McCarthy said, must have been for some reason or another. So he didn't have an answer then, but I don't know. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting. Chris, what are your rankings?
I have no idea. I genuinely have no idea. This is apples against oranges. If I was to rank them on enjoyment, Road would definitely be number 1. Then probably Blood Meridian, and then 1984. And then Child of God, but that's harsh. I like Child of God a lot. I know I'm the only one that did. And I see an awful lot of parallels with Blood Meridian. I sort of think of them as companion novels in a lot of ways, because they do deal with the more darker aspects of human nature, which doesn't get explored an awful lot, and I suppose this does as well. And this one's a bit more. Like I say, this one's hard to rate because of that general. Oh God, it's too close. It's too close. It's too relevant.
Top 1 books.
Yeah, 4 top 1 books, something like that. But I actually think long term, if I was to reread all these, once every 3 years or something, I would say that actually The Road will end up as pretty comfortably as number 3 out of all of these books. Even though on first read, it's top. I think Blood Meridian and this have much more depth to them. Than The Road. Not to say The Road doesn't have depth, but the amount of stuff and the amount of themes that are in it is just almost overwhelming for those 2 other books.
Interesting.
Well, I've only read two of these, so.
It's easy for you.
Do you like this?
Child of God.
Do you like this more than Child of God?
He hates this book.
So this would be number 1, as much as I hate it.
Damn it.
I didn't like Child of God, so that, but it definitely did not. It doesn't have the impact that this one has, and it's not. I found a lot of faults with Child of God myself in various places that I didn't care for, and so that one I just threw in the fireplace. This one I wouldn't dare, because I might get arrested or something. But no, this is a masterpiece. It's so perfectly put together. It's so perfectly written. It would definitely be no matter how much I hate it, it's a true classic, and it's one of the more perfect books written. It's really good.
Nice. So next month will be American Psycho, and we will all be back for that, doing more rankings, and Chris has pulled it out from his infinite bookshelf. So we'll see everyone in a month. Oh, we have to do outros. Steve, would you like to go first?
Sure. The easiest way is to go to pagestream.com. All this stuff is there, all the links and we have blog article, we have blog posts, we have our forum. Come and join our forum, come and chat with us. You can also find me on Speculative Speculations.
Chris?
Me. So you can find me on my YouTube channel where I talk about books on the Chronicle of Chris. You can find me in Speculative Speculations. You can find me on Pigeon forums. You can, I don't know what else I do. I've lost the thread a little bit. Jared?
You can find me at the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel, and you can find me on Speculative Speculations podcast, along with many other fine podcasts here at pagechewing.com.
And you can find me on the YouTube channel Reading by the Rainy Mountain, on the podcast Speculative Speculations, and hanging out on the forum and on Steve's podcast sometimes. If you'd like to join us for these or any other of the many reading groups we've got going on, consider checking out the Patreon forum. We will see you in a month. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.
And remember, Big Brother's watching you.
Yeah. Important note. See you soon.